This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for a journey that takes us deep into the heart of the medieval world.
We're focusing on a philosophical earthquake, really.
Yeah.
Caused by a 10th century polymath.
We are diving into a stack of sources that give us the ultimate shortcut to understanding the mind of Avicenna ibn Sina and his radical reinterpretation of classical Greek thought.
You know, Avicenna he's arguably the single most influential figure bridging Greek philosophy and the medieval world. And our sources all confirm that the core tension, the real drama, it all comes down to how he treated Aristotle's dense metaphysics.
He essentially ripped the theological blanket right off it.
He did, completely.
And that is our mission today. We're trying to figure out how Avicenna dared to treat Aristotle's ultimate inquiry into existence not as theological dogma, but as pure systematic science.
Why did he call it practical science?
Exactly. And how did this one decision trigger a philosophical war that echoed for centuries, involving figures like Al-Ghazali and, later on, Thomas Aquinas?
Well, what's truly critical to understand, and this is the key to everything, is that Avicenna's refusal to frame Aristotle's thought within religious theology, what they called kalam. That's the key to his entire system.
So it's about what he didn't do.
It is. His intellectual purity, his dedication to this ancient rationalism above everything else had forced him into this constant and often very dangerous struggle between intellectual truth and, political survival.
That tension sounds absolutely exhausting. But let's start with the intellectual truths. Okay, so let's unpack this. What exactly did Avicenna mean by treating Aristotle's metaphysics as ilm as science, pure and simple?
For Avicenna, philosophy wasn't just a collection of opinions. It was a rigidly defined scientific system. He upheld the strict Aristotelian hierarchy of knowledge.
Okay, so there's a ladder you have to climb.
A very specific ladder. You have to start with natural science, then master mathematics, and only after that, do you arrive at metaphysics.
So metaphysics isn't some mystical, spiritual capstone. It's the final, most refined chapter of the scientific inquiry after you've already explored the visible world.
Exactly right. Metaphysics, in his view, deals with the necessary logical structure of the world. It's about causality, the hierarchy of existence, and this deep relationship between necessity versus possibility.
It's an investigation into how existence has to work logically.
A pure academic investigation. And this is the point where he just completely breaks from his culture.
Right.
It is. This insistence meant he explicitly rejected the idea that metaphysics should be folded into kalam, or religious theology.
And why was that so radical?
Because kalam fundamentally relies on revealed premises, truths you get from Scripture. Avicenna saw that approach as intellectually weak in demonstration.
Because it starts from faith, not reason.
Exactly. It doesn't start from universal self-evident principles that any mind can access. For him, metaphysics was a theoretical science meant to explain the logical structure of the world, not a theology designed to prove a religious text.
Wow. That is a profound distinction. It moves the whole conversation from faith to, physics and logic.
It does.
And that brings us directly to Avicenna's most important conceptual innovation, the wujib al-wujud, or the necessary existent.
Right. This is the logical device he used to replace Aristotle's more obscure, unmoved mover.
So how does it work?
He basically took the idea of a prime cause and turned it into a logical prerequisite for existence itself. Think of the universe as a chain of events, which he called possible existence.
Things that might or might not exist.
Exactly. Everything depends on something else. But that chain of cause and effect can't go back forever. You can't have an infinite regress. So logically, there must be a starting point.
Something that exists not because something else caused it,
but because it exists by its own logical necessity. It has to exist for anything else to exist.
He's using pure, undeniable logic here, completely sidestepping revelation.
Absolutely. It's a requirement of physics and coherent logic. But here's the radical part, especially for his time. And here's where we contrast it with the traditional concept of Allah, the personality God.
Okay.
The traditional God acts through will and intention. He chooses to create. Avicenna's necessary existent operates entirely through necessity.
So there's no choice involved. It's a constant, fixed mechanism.
Precisely. The universe doesn't come from a singular conscious act of creation and time. Instead, the world emanates or flows from the necessary existent out of sheer necessity.
Like a shadow follows light.
That's a perfect analogy, and this preserves the Aristotelian idea of the world's eternality. And critically, this necessary existent, because it operates by necessity, does not intervene. It has no purpose, no emotion, and it certainly doesn't cause miracles that violate the very natural laws it establishes.
That really makes it feel less like a personal deity and much more like a fixed cosmic principle.
It is the ultimate non-personal constant. Think of it like the scientific equivalent of gravity or the speed of light in modern cosmology.
It's the immutable rule that has to be there for the rest of the universe to work.
It's a completely scientific and practical foundation for reality.
This pure, almost clinical rationalism makes me wonder, was Avicenna truly being faithful to Aristotle? Or was he just using Aristotle as a springboard for his own system?
That's a great question. And the consensus is he was one of the most consistent, maybe the most rigorously Aristotelian thinker of the Middle Ages.
Really?
Yes, because he accepted the most philosophically explosive parts, the non-personal prime mover and the world's eternality, without compromising. His whole framework of possibility and necessity wasn't seen as a contradiction, but more like providing the rigorous logical infrastructure that Aristotle himself might have built.
But how does a thinker like that, living in the 10th century Abbasid world, how does he survive holding these explosive anti-theological views?
And this is where we have to connect the philosophy to the man. Avicenna's life was, well, it was chaos. He wasn't some quiet academic in a library.
He was a political operative, a physician.
A vizier, constantly on the run from political upheaval. He had to be a pragmatist. We know he found Kalam, the local religious debate, to be intellectually embarrassing. But crucially, our sources suggest his family came from the older Persian cultural sphere.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
It means a worldview, maybe stemming from Zoroastrian ideas, that emphasize cosmic order, strict necessity, and pure reason over the idea of a personal, intervening creator God.
So he had a cultural predisposition toward a natural, ordered cosmos.
Which aligns perfectly with Aristotle.
Perfectly. But it was in direct conflict with the prevailing theology around him. And here is the crucial insight that really defines his legacy. Avicenna seems to have treated the outward practice of Islam as a functional requirement for social belonging.
A political maneuver, as one source puts it.
Right. Intellectually, his core allegiance was to a fusion of Greek rationalism and that Persian worldview. But wait, isn't that a highly cynical interpretation? I mean, the man was a practicing Muslim. He wrote commentaries on the Quran. How can we be sure his faith wasn't genuine, even if it was filtered through his philosophical lens?
That's a vital question, because it's all about what his actions mean. Yes, he performed the social requirements, but his philosophical system functionally denies the most important characteristics of the religious God, his will, his intention, his creative act.
So his intellectual work speaks louder than his social conformity.
I think so. And this distance, this refusal to attack religion openly, is exactly why he posed such a devastating threat.
So this isn't open heresy. It's something far more subtle. It's that quiet dismantling we mentioned, silent neutralization.
Yes. How did it work in practice? He provided a scientific or philosophical explanation for every key religious tenet, and in doing so, he absorbed the phenomenon into the natural world.
Okay, give me an example.
A prophet, not a receiver of supernatural revelation, but a highly imaginative wise man whose powerful intellect can translate complex truths into metaphors the masses can grasp.
And miracles.
Psychological phenomena, or maybe minor manifestations of natural processes we don't fully understand yet, but not violations of natural law. Revelation itself was just a poetic expression of the highest function of the human intellect.
So he used the theological vocabulary as a kind of social mask, but completely changed the meaning underneath.
Precisely. And his most dangerous move was using the name Allah for his necessary existent. For him, this was a linguistic translation needed for social cohesion. But the rational truth, the necessary existent, was considered superior and more universal than the culturally specific concept of Allah.
Universal philosophical principle always trumps local religious custom for him.
Always.
And now we can finally understand why Al-Ghazali, the great theologian, just exploded in rage. He wasn't just arguing about words.
Not at all. Ghazali saw the existential danger. Avicenna wasn't attacking faith head-on. He was subtly absorbing the spiritual into the philosophical, rendering religious belief an empty political vessel. Useful for social control, maybe, but devoid of eternal truth.
And that's why Ghazali zeroed in on those specific points.
That's why he had to destroy the philosophical pressure points. The world's eternality, the denial of God's intention, and the denial of physical resurrection. You knock those out, and the personality God is saved.
Okay, let's widen the lens. Let's take this philosophy and apply it to the structures of medieval society. If religion was just a social arrangement for Avicenna, what was really running the world? East and West?
Well, the sources point to a critical historical reality. Practical rule by the Quran as a single administrative code, it really reached its limit pretty early by the late Umayyad period.
So by Avicenna's time, in the Abbasid Caliphate,
Political reality forced them to rely on massive, complex Persian administrative systems. We're talking sophisticated bureaucracies, centralized diwans for records and taxation, all inherited from the Sassanid Empire.
so religious law might set the ethical tone, but the day-to-day work of governing, like figuring out taxes, was handled by a secular pre-Islamic machine.
Precisely. The administration was run by specialized, often non-Arab, civil servants, the bureaucrats. And this reliance on the practical, secular machinery of administration created the space for a non-theological explanation of reality, like Avicenna's, to even be plausible.
Because the real world was already being run by necessity and custom, not just divine will.
Right. And the sources confirm the European counterpart was built on similar pragmatic foundations, even if the structure looked completely different.
So this idea of rule by the Bible,
It didn't exist in medieval Europe either. The real governance system was a complex polysystem rooted in decentralized Germanic customary law mixed with a partial recovery of sophisticated Roman law.
so is run by lawyers and custom, not directly by scripture.
Exactly. So in both of these massive civilizations, the actual engines of governance, the law, the administration, the finance, they were functionally secular, rooted in the practical, inherited legacies of Rome and the Sassanids.
And that is the essential bridge. This functional reality created the intellectual possibility for a rationalist like Avicenna to treat philosophy as the ultimate truth.
The ultimate truth needed to explain the real functioning world, independent of any theological framework.
Which leads us right into the final contrast. If the Abbasids inherited this immense Persian bureaucracy, why didn't Europe follow suit? Why didn't they build a massive central administrative state?
Europe just lacked the historical and structural preconditions entirely. The contrast is really stark. The Roman Empire itself, for all its size, was mainly a military and legal empire. It wasn't a centralized bureaucratic state like China or the Abbasid Caliphate.
It didn't have the civil service exams, the career paths.
None of that. And then post-Rome, the foundation was rooted in the Germanic forest people culture, as the sources call them. A primitive, highly decentralized society focused on blood ties, kinship, and local custom.
A warrior society, not an administrative one.
Completely. They lack the expertise and even the cultural concept for complex, centralized administration.
And the geography and economy must have just reinforced that decentralization.
Totally. Europe lacked the key infrastructure, didn't have the giant cities, the concentrated population, or a big enough central tax base to support a permanent professional civil service. So power just remained permanently dispersed.
Split between the Pope, the Emperor, local lords, the cities.
All of them. So the paths just diverged completely. The Abbasid state, inheriting that Sassanid tradition, remained a state of administration run by professional civil servants.
While Europe evolved into a state of law, run by legal experts, lawyers, jurists, scholars, all focused on Roman and canon law.
And that fundamental difference in governance shaped how each civilization would either absorb or reject the pure rationalism that Avicenna was offering.
So to summarize Avicenna's profound legacy, he was the purest, most consistent Aristotelian of the Middle Ages, treating metaphysics as a scientific prerequisite for existence itself.
Completely separate from religious doctrine. He was so consistent that his thought had to be, well, functionally rejected by the Islamic world, with Al-Ghazali leading that defense to protect the core attributes of the personality God.
And yet his logical framework was absolutely vital to Europe.
Vital. It was adopted and adapted by figures like Thomas Aquinas. But even Aquinas, in trying to integrate Avicenna, you can see him struggling to fully erase that essential, non-personal, rational core that Avicenna had built out of pure logic.
Avicenna left behind this universal logical principle, and for him, that principle was always the highest truth.
Indeed. And here's our provocative closing thought for you to mull over. Avicenna's core insight that the universal rational principle of existence, the necessary existent, is a higher, more immutable truth than any culturally specific religious deity, was so profound that it essentially forced two different civilizations, the Islamic world and Europe, to rely on and reinforce two fundamentally different governance structures.
A bureaucracy versus a law state.
Right. All to either accommodate or violently reject the tension between that pure reason and their inherited faith. So the question for you is, in your own life, what universal logical principles do you prioritize over cultural context or social expediency?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.